to show you what happened in Saudi Arabia and China that is sending shockwaves through Washington and the Middle East right now. The Biden administration is, of course, hiding it from you. They don't want to talk about it. But I'll show you this in a minute. But first, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that the United States is mirroring almost exactly what led to the fall of the Roman Empire. Just dive into the research. Because during the late Roman Empire, the government found itself in almost the exact same situation as the United States today. The Romans facing massive military spending to satiate their continued expansion. They went into massive debt. They started borrowing all kinds of money in order to pay for this military expansion. It all created a downward debt spiral that consumed the Roman Empire, and they couldn't get out of it. Today, the U.S. government is also facing skyrocketing levels of debt, with the national debt currently sitting at $33 trillion. This level of indebtedness is unsustainable. How are they going to get out of this? The United States now has over 750 military bases around the world. It's one of the most infuriating things in the world to me. It's spending billions to overthrow other governments around the world. Here was Senator John McCain in Ukraine in 2013 admitting they're in the process of regime change.
Senator, you have just addressed the crowd of protesters there, yourself in Kiev. What is it you're trying to do here?
Hopefully what we're trying to do is bring about a peaceful transition here.
Oh, they got their proxy government all right. So the U.S. has massive military expansion by installing our own proxy governments and military bases around the world, but don't call it an empire. But it's the same thing as the Romans, just with a different name. Another factor that contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire was the debasement of the currency. Just like the United States, in an effort to finance its military operations and other expenses, the Roman Empire began to issue coins with less silver inside of it. That led to hyperinflation. It led to a loss of faith in the currency. Does that sound familiar to you? Where have I heard this before? Only this time, the difference is that the United States dollar isn't tied to any gold or any silver. It's tied to nothing. The U.S. dollar is backed up by debt and U.S. military power. And, most importantly, using the U.S. dollar to pay for oil transactions. So this week, Saudi Arabia surprised Joe Biden and the rest of the West by suddenly announcing a massive oil production cut, which will reduce OPEC Plus's production by another 1.5 million barrels per day until the end of the year. Oil prices then shot up above $80 a barrel, up 6%. But it's not just about the oil production. It's about what happened next. The Biden administration threatened Saudi Arabia with severe consequences. Like what? Pulling our military protection? Like what else are we going to threaten them with? His response? Actually a jaw dropper. The Crown Prince said he's done pleasing the United States, and he doesn't care what President Biden thinks of him. Done pleasing the United States. The only reason that I can think of that you say something like this publicly in an interview in a newspaper is because you're already dating somebody else. And the Saudis are now fully engaged with China and Russia. This game is over for the United States. Now, for a few years now, Saudi Arabia has been moving away from the United States. Then candidate Biden said they need to be treated like they're a pariah, like the pariah they are. Remember this?
And I would make it very clear, we were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
But then suddenly we needed cheap oil, and Biden flew over to the kingdom to kiss the ring of the Crown Prince. It was embarrassing. And then this moment happened. Reporters at that meeting yelled out, "Hey, Mr. President, is Saudi Arabia still a pariah?" Just watch the Crown Prince laugh about it during that question.
President Biden, is Saudi Arabia still a pariah? President Biden.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we've relied on them for their oil reserves, and they relied on us for our military protection. It's been a mutually beneficial relationship, but that's all changing now. They're starting to look beyond the United States for allies and are forging closer ties with countries like China and Russia. So what does this mean for the United States? Well, for starters, it means we're going to lose a boatload of money. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil producers, and we've been buying their oil for years. They start selling to China and Russia instead, and now we're going to have to pay more for our oil. Just sitting here in this port, watching the Saudi Arabian oil barges leave port and go out. It's an amazing sight to behold. So that's going to hit the American consumers very, very hard, as everything from gas prices to heating bills will go up. But it's not just oil prices that will be affected. Saudi Arabia is also a major investor in the United States. They own a lot of our debt, and they invest heavily in American companies. If they start pulling their money out of the United States, it's going to hurt our economy. It's already happening. Just look at the inflation numbers. Saudi Arabia is not only distancing itself from the United States, but also selling off its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds, which is a devastating blow to the U.S. economy. It's worth noting that Saudi Arabia has been the largest foreign holder of U.S. Treasury bonds for many years. So this is a significant shift in the global economy. Now, some might say, so what's a big deal? Just one country selling off some bonds. What's the big deal here, Clayton? Well, let me explain. Because U.S. Treasury bonds are a critical source of funding for the United States government, and they are used to finance everything from Social Security, Medicare, military, infrastructure, everything. And when a country like Saudi Arabia sells off large amounts of these bonds, it puts downward pressure on the prices, which means that the United States government now has to pay higher interest rates to attract new buyers. This can increase the cost of borrowing for the U.S. government, which can in turn lead to higher taxes, inflation, even a massive recession, which we are facing right now. And right now, China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia are dumping massive amounts of U.S. debt. If they won't finance our massive debt, then who will? Who's going to step in? Who has money? So why this week? Why did all of this happen now? Because follow the money. The U.S. dollar is dying, and America's power is dying. China's new partnership with Russia has grown even further. China mediated a new era of peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Just look at these guys, shaking every hand they have in one big Chinese noodle salad. I don't see Biden's hand in there between Iran and China and Saudi Arabia. The U.S. has been trying to create havoc between these countries, but they're not having it. In fact, exports of oil and precious minerals have dramatically shifted away from the United States to one another, to these new partnerships. The United States has been using its control over the dollar to weaponize its economic power, using sanctions against China, Iran, and Russia, trying to pressure other countries to comply with its foreign policy goals. The sanctions show just how desperate the United States is to try and replace dependence on Russia and China for all of our minerals and our manufacturing. We are sitting on mountains of uranium, lithium, gold, oil, and yet we don't have the infrastructure to pull it out of the ground. Last week, the head of the European Union Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, admitted the truth about our reliance on China and Russia for minerals and resources. It was a pretty big admission moment. Listen.
We know this is an era where we rely on one single supplier, China. 98% of our rare earth supply, 93% of our magnesium, 97% of our lithium, just to name a few.
And literally on the same day that she made that statement, Ford Motor Company admitted it's spending billions to team up with China to mine minerals for its electric cars. This is how bad it's gotten, guys. The New World Order unfolding right before our eyes. The United States loves to try sanctions first, and if those don't work, they go to war next. So that's the new